Catherine Mercer walked into the law office of Barnes and Wilson with her head held high. At 32, she was about to become the youngest partner in the firm's history. Her perfectly tailored navy suit and confident smile hid the years of struggle it had taken to reach this moment. "Congratulations, Catherine," said George Barnes, the firm's founding partner, as he extended his hand. His gray hair and weathered face showed his 40 years in the profession. "You've earned this." Catherine smiled and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." What no one in the room knew was how Catherine had truly climbed so high so fast. While her law school grades were excellent and her work ethic remarkable, there was more to her success than met the eye. 3 years earlier, Catherine had been assigned a difficult case defending a real estate developer accused of bribing city officials. Most lawyers would have advised a plea deal, but Catherine saw an opportunity. She found ways to delay the trial, misplaced key evidence, and subtly pressured witnesses until the prosecution's case fell apart. Her client walked free, and Catherine's reputation soared. "She's a miracle worker," people whispered in courthouse hallways. In her new corner office with its view of downtown, Catherine hung her law school diploma next to her partner's certificate. She ran her fingers along the gold lettering of her name. "Miss Mercer," her assistant called from the doorway. "Your 2 o'clock is here." "And Judge Harmon's office called to confirm your appearance next week." Catherine nodded. Judge Eleanor Harmon was known as the toughest judge in the district. Fair but uncompromising. Most lawyers feared her courtroom, but Catherine saw her as just another obstacle to overcome. That evening, Catherine celebrated her promotion at an expensive restaurant. As she sipped champagne, her phone buzzed with congratulatory messages. One was from Marcus Chen, an old classmate who now worked for the FBI. "Congrats on making partner. We should catch up sometime," his message read. Catherine replied with a polite thanks, but had no intention of meeting. She and Marcus had taken different paths after law school. He chose public service while she chased power and money. His moral compass was too rigid for her taste. Back at her luxury apartment, Catherine kicked off her heels and poured another glass of champagne. She walked to the window overlooking the city lights. Everything was falling into place. At this rate, she could become the firm's managing partner within 5 years. In her bedroom, Catherine opened her laptop to review her next big case, defending a pharmaceutical executive accused of covering up dangerous side effects of a popular medication. The evidence against him was strong, but Catherine already had ideas about how certain files might disappear and how certain witnesses might suddenly become unavailable. "Rules are for people who can't figure out how to break them," she said to herself, a phrase her father had taught her before he went to prison for tax fraud when she was 12. As she closed her laptop, Catherine didn't know that this case would be the beginning of her downfall. She didn't know that Judge Harmon had already noticed patterns in her cases. And she certainly didn't know that Marcus Chen had been assigned to investigate corruption in the legal system, with her name on a list of suspects. Catherine Mercer believed she was untouchable. The next 8 months would prove just how wrong she was. 2 months after becoming partner, Catherine sat at the head of the conference table, leading a meeting with her team of junior associates. The pharmaceutical case was her biggest yet, with millions of dollars and her client's freedom at stake. "The FDA report is our biggest problem," Catherine said, tapping her pen against a thick folder. "Jessica, I need you to find a way to challenge its admissibility." Jessica Parker, a first-year associate with bright eyes and idealistic views, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "But the report follows all proper protocols. I don't see legal grounds to exclude it." Catherine's smile remained, but her eyes turned cold. "Then look harder. That's what I'm paying you for." After the meeting, Catherine called Jessica into her office and closed the door. "Let me be clear," Catherine said quietly. "Our job is to win, not to worry about what's right or wrong." "But there are ethical boundaries," Jessica started. "There are guidelines," Catherine interrupted. "And creative interpretations. That's the difference between good lawyers and great ones." She leaned forward. "I didn't get where I am by playing it safe. Neither will you." The next day, Jessica requested a transfer to another department. By the end of the month, she had quit the firm altogether. She wasn't the first. 3 other young lawyers had left in the past year after working with Catherine. The HR director raised concerns with George Barnes, but Catherine's cases brought in too much money to question her methods. Probably just can't handle the pressure, George said, dismissing the pattern. At the courthouse, people noticed other things about Catherine Mercer. Court clerks whispered about how files in her cases sometimes went missing, only to reappear after key deadlines had passed. Witnesses in her cases occasionally changed their stories dramatically or became suddenly unreachable. One afternoon, Judge Eleanor Harmon was reviewing case files when her clerk, Michael, knocked on her door. "You asked me to track unusual patterns," Michael said, placing a folder on her desk. "Ms. Mercer has had 17 cases in your court. In 12 of them, evidence was lost, witnesses changed testimony, or unusual procedural errors occurred." Judge Harmon studied the document with her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. At 65, she had seen every trick in the book during her 30 years on the bench. Lawyers like Catherine weren't new, but they were dangerous. "Thank you, Michael. Keep this between us for now." That same week, Catherine had lunch with Marcus Chen at an upscale restaurant. She'd finally agreed to meet, thinking it wise to maintain connections with someone in the FBI. "You've made quite a name for yourself," Marcus said, studying her over his water glass. Catherine smiled. "Hard work pays off." "Does it? I heard about the Westbrook case. Remarkable how that key witness suddenly changed his story." Catherine's smile didn't falter. "People realize the truth eventually." "Truth is interesting that way," Marcus said. "It tends to come out, one way or another." Back at her office, Catherine dismissed the veiled warning. Marcus was just jealous of her success. Everyone was. They couldn't understand what it took to win at all costs. That evening, Catherine received an unexpected email from George Barnes requesting a meeting the following morning. Attached was a formal complaint from a client claiming Catherine had advised him to destroy documents relevant to his case. For the first time, a flicker of worry crossed Catherine's face. She deleted the email and began making calls. She knew people who could make problems disappear. She'd handled worse situations before. What Catherine didn't know was that Judge Harmon had already spoken with the Bar Association's Ethics Committee, or that Marcus Chen had opened an official investigation file with her name on it, or that her own assistant had been quietly documenting her questionable actions for months. The walls were closing in, but Catherine Mercer still believed she was too clever to be caught. Catherine paced in her office, the morning sun casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. The meeting with George Barnes had gone better than expected. The client complaint had been handled. A few calls to the right people, a carefully worded letter hinting at countersuit, and the problem vanished. "Miss Mercer," her assistant Sarah knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Mr. Donovan is here to see you." Richard Donovan entered, his expensive suit unable to hide his nervous energy. As CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, he faced 20 years in prison if convicted of knowingly selling medication that caused liver damage in thousands of patients. "They found a new witness," he said without greeting. "A former lab technician who claims I saw the test results and ordered them buried." Catherine gestured for him to sit. "Is it true?" "Does it matter?" Donovan snapped. "I'm paying you 7 figures to make this go away." Catherine smiled thinly. "It always matters what's true, Mr. Donovan. It helps me know which truths to highlight and which to manage." After he left, Catherine called her investigator, a former police officer who wasn't particular about legal boundaries. "I need everything on James Wilson," she instructed. The courthouse hallway buzzed with whispers as Catherine strode confidently toward courtroom 3. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing like a countdown. The Donovan pharmaceutical case was scheduled for a critical evidence hearing before Judge Harmon. "Ms. Mercer," a voice called from behind. Catherine turned to see Marcus Chen approaching, his FBI badge visible on his belt. "Agent Chen," she said coolly, "what brings you to civil court today?" "Just observing," he replied with a small smile. "Interesting cases come through Judge Harmon's courtroom." Catherine felt a flicker of unease but maintained her composure. "Well, don't let me keep you from your observations." Inside the courtroom, Catherine noticed something unusual. Judge Harmon's clerk was organizing a stack of folders marked sealed on the bench. Catherine recognized none of them from the case file. The bailiff called the court to order as Judge Harmon entered, her expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Good morning, Judge Harmon began. Before we address the evidence motions in Donovan Pharmaceuticals, there is another matter requiring immediate attention. She looked directly at Catherine. Ms. Mercer, please approach the bench. Catherine walked forward, confused but not concerned. Behind her, the courtroom door opened quietly as several people entered. Ms. Mercer, Judge Harmon said in a low voice, I'm informing you that you are the subject of an ongoing investigation into witness tampering, evidence suppression, and obstruction of justice. Catherine's mouth went dry. Your Honor, I don't understand. You will remain silent, Judge Harmon interrupted. This hearing is now adjourned. Bailiff, please clear the courtroom except for essential personnel. As bewildered spectators filed out, Catherine noticed her assistant Sarah remaining in her seat. Near the back, Marcus Chen stood with two other agents. The court reporter continued typing silently. For the record, Judge Harmon announced once the doors closed, this is now a special hearing pursuant to case number XJDF 2245 in re. Investigation of attorney Catherine Mercer. She opened one of the sealed folders. Ms. Mercer, we have evidence indicating systematic misconduct across multiple cases under your supervision. Catherine's legal mind kicked into high gear. Your Honor, I haven't been notified of any investigation. I'm entitled to representation and proper. You will have every legal protection. Judge Harmon cut in. Agent Chen, please proceed. Marcus approached with a tablet. Ms. Mercer, we've been investigating patterns of witness intimidation and evidence tampering in your cases for the past 4 months. He played a video showing Catherine hiding documents in the Donovan case. Then another of her meeting with James Wilson in a parking garage 3 days before he changed his testimony. Your assistant Sarah has been cooperating with our investigation, Marcus continued. She's provided documentation of instructions you gave to suppress evidence in 7 different cases. Catherine turned to see Sarah, avoiding her gaze. We have recordings, Marcus added, of you instructing junior associates to, and I quote, lose the problematic files and make sure that witness doesn't make it to court. Catherine's mind raced through possible defenses. Illegal surveillance, entrapment, witness credibility. She needed time. Your Honor, she said, finding her voice, these are serious allegations requiring careful examination. I request a continuance to prepare a response and secure counsel. Judge Harmon nodded. You'll have your opportunity, Ms. Mercer. This hearing is to inform you of the investigation and to establish preliminary protective orders. She signed a document. You are hereby ordered not to contact any witnesses in the Donovan case or destroy any documents related to any of your cases. Your access to firm files will be limited to current, non-sensitive matters. Catherine felt the courtroom spinning. Everything she built was at risk. Additionally, Judge Harmon continued, the Bar Association has been notified and has opened its own ethics investigation. As Catherine left the courtroom, Marcus Chen stepped beside her. You know what's interesting? He said quietly. You were so busy watching for enemies that you never noticed who was really watching you. Catherine stepped into the hallway, her reputation hanging by a thread. The investigation was only beginning, but for the first time in her career, Catherine Mercer felt something unfamiliar. Fear. The main courtroom of the federal courthouse had never been so packed. Journalists filled the back rows, their pens poised over notepads. Legal interns squeezed into any available space, eager to witness the high-profile case that had the entire legal community buzzing. Catherine Mercer sat beside her attorney, David Schwartz, a well-known defender of lawyers facing ethics charges. Her normally perfect appearance showed signs of strain, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of her usual elegant style. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Eleanor Harmon entered the courtroom. The Donovan pharmaceutical trial had been reassigned to another judge. Today was about Catherine herself, facing charges of witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and evidence suppression. 3 weeks of investigation had produced a mountain of evidence against her. You may be seated, Judge Harmon said, adjusting her glasses. We're here for the United States versus Catherine Mercer. Are both sides ready to proceed? Marcus Chen sat at the prosecution table. The government is ready, Your Honor. Schwartz stood. Defense is ready. Marcus approached the center of the courtroom. Your Honor, The government will prove that Ms. Mercer systematically undermined the justice system she swore to uphold. We will present evidence of her threatening witnesses, hiding crucial documents, and even bribing court officials. As Marcus detailed the case, Catherine scanned the courtroom. She spotted Sarah sitting behind the prosecution, avoiding eye contact. George Barnes was notably absent. The firm had already removed her name from their door and website. Marcus called his first witness, Jessica Parker, the junior associate who had quit after working with Catherine. Miss Parker, can you describe what happened when you raised ethical concerns about the Donovan case? Marcus asked. Jessica leaned toward the microphone. Ms. Mercer told me our job was to win, not to worry about right and wrong. When I insisted certain evidence had to be turned over to the other side, she removed me from the case and told others I couldn't handle the pressure. More witnesses followed. A court clerk admitted accepting money to misplace filings. A former client described how Catherine had coached him to lie under oath. Each testimony added to the growing picture of Catherine's misconduct. During a brief recess, Catherine confronted her lawyer in the conference room. "This is a witch hunt," she hissed. "Harmon has had it in for me for years." Schwartz looked at her with tired eyes. "Catherine, they have recordings. They have documents. Your own assistant has provided emails where you explicitly instructed staff to hide evidence." "I need to testify," Catherine insisted. "I can explain everything." "That would be unwise," Schwartz warned. "The prosecution will tear you apart on cross-examination." But Catherine wouldn't listen. When court resumed, Schwartz reluctantly called her to the stand. At first, Catherine was composed, offering reasonable explanations for each accusation. Files were misplaced due to clerical errors. Meetings with witnesses were routine preparation. Any inappropriate comments were taken out of context. Then Marcus stood for cross-examination. "Ms. Mercer, were you in Judge Harmon's courtroom on May 15th for the Peterson case?" Catherine frowned. "Yes, but that case isn't part of these charges." "Just establishing a timeline," Marcus said smoothly. He placed a document on the projector. "This is a text message you sent to your assistant that day. It reads, 'Harmon is an old fool. I could run circles around her if I needed to.'" Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. "And this email from the next day," Marcus continued, displaying another document. "To James Wilson, it says, 'Consider your daughter's future when you decide what to remember about those lab reports.'" Catherine's facade cracked. "That's not what I meant." And finally, Marcus said, playing an audio recording, "This is you speaking to a colleague last month." Catherine's voice filled the courtroom. The law is just a game. The people who think it's sacred are the easiest to beat. Judge Harmon's face hardened as the recording ended. Catherine looked around desperately, watching as her career and freedom crumbled before her eyes. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Harmon prepared to deliver her verdict. After a 2-week trial that had captivated the legal community, everyone waited to learn Catherine Mercer's fate. The evidence against her had been overwhelming. Recordings, emails, witness testimony, all painting a clear picture of a lawyer who had repeatedly broken the law she was sworn to uphold. Catherine sat straight-backed at the defense table, her designer suit replaced by a simple navy dress. Her once confident expression now showed the strain of sleepless nights and shattered ambitions. Beside her, David Schwartz arranged papers, already preparing for an appeal they both knew would likely fail. "Before I deliver my decision," Judge Harmon began, removing her glasses, "I want to address Ms. Mercer directly." The judge's piercing gaze fixed on Catherine. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen attorneys who made honest mistakes. I have seen those who, in their passion to defend clients, occasionally stepped over lines they shouldn't have crossed." Judge Harmon's voice hardened. "But I have rarely seen someone who so systematically and deliberately corrupted our legal system for personal gain and advancement." Catherine stared straight ahead, refusing to show emotion as whispers spread through the courtroom. "The law is not a game, Ms. Mercer. It is the foundation of a just society. Each time you tampered with evidence, each time you intimidated a witness, each time you lied to this court, you didn't just break rules. You betrayed every citizen who depends on our justice system to be fair and honest." Judge Harmon lifted a document. "The jury has found you guilty on 14 counts of obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and evidence tampering. It is now my duty to sentence you accordingly. Catherine finally looked up, meeting the judge's gaze. Catherine Mercer, I hereby sentence you to 5 years in federal prison. Additionally, I am recommending immediate disbarment proceedings with the State Bar Association. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. 5 years was significantly more than most legal observers had predicted. Your Honor, Schwartz began, rising quickly, we request bail pending appeal. Denied. Judge Harmon interrupted. Ms. Mercer has demonstrated a pattern of manipulating the system. She will begin serving her sentence immediately. The bailiff approached Catherine. The reality of what was happening finally broke through her careful composure. Her hands trembled as she was handcuffed. This isn't over, she whispered to Schwartz as she was led away. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Marcus Chen as he descended the steps. Agent Chen, will this case lead to reviews of Mercer's previous trials? Marcus nodded gravely. The Justice Department is already examining every case Ms. Mercer handled in the past 5 years. Several convictions may be overturned, and some civil settlements will likely be reopened. Back in her chambers, Judge Harmon watched news coverage of Catherine being led to a prisoner transport van. Sarah, Catherine's former assistant, knocked softly on the open door. You wanted to see me, Your Honor? Judge Harmon motioned for her to enter. Yes, Ms. Thompson, I wanted to thank you for your courage. Coming forward against Ms. Mercer couldn't have been easy. Sarah sank into a chair. It wasn't. I admired her once, her confidence, her success. I convinced myself the small ethical shortcuts were just part of being a tough lawyer. She looked down at her hands. By the time I realized how far over the line she'd gone, I felt trapped. That's how corruption works, Judge Harmon said softly. It normalizes the unacceptable, step by small step. That evening, Catherine changed from her dress into an orange jumpsuit at the Federal Detention Center. A guard led her to a small cell containing a metal bed, toilet, and sink. The door clanged shut behind her. For the first time, Catherine Mercer, who had spent her career bending rules and manipulating outcomes, found herself in a place where she had no control. Here, she couldn't charm, threaten, or bribe her way to what she wanted. Here, her name carried no power. As Catherine sat on the thin mattress, the reality of the next 5 years crashed down upon her. The judge had shown her otherwise, indeed. Catherine Mercer stared at the gray cinder block wall of her cell in the Federal Correctional Institution. 6 months had passed since Judge Harmon's sentencing, yet Catherine still woke each morning expecting to find herself in her luxury apartment. Instead, she faced another day of rigid schedules, institutional food, and the company of women she would never have associated with in her previous life. Mail call, Mercer, a guard announced, sliding an envelope through the door slot. Catherine recognized her mother's handwriting. She opened it hesitantly, having avoided contact with family since her conviction. Catherine, the letter began, I've respected your wishes not to visit, but I can't stay silent anymore. Your father made the same mistakes, believing himself too clever to be caught, seeing rules as beneath him. It destroyed him, and now it's destroying you. Please don't waste these years. Find a way to learn from this. Catherine crumpled the letter, then smoothed it out again. Her father had died alone 2 years after his release from prison, never rebuilding his life. Was that her future too? Later that day, in the prison library, Catherine noticed a new book on the shelf, a legal ethics textbook. She pulled it down, curious despite herself. As she flipped through the pages, a familiar name caught her eye. The book cited one of her cases as an example of judicial misconduct. Interested in law? Asked an older woman shelving books nearby. I was a lawyer, Catherine replied stiffly. The woman nodded without judgment. I'm Dr. Elaine Winters. I teach legal ethics at the State University. I volunteer here twice a week. Catherine studied her. Why would you waste your time here? Because everyone deserves a chance to rebuild, Dr. Winters said simply. Even those who've made serious mistakes. That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. The conversation with Dr. Winters, her mother's letter, and seeing her name in that textbook as a cautionary tale all swirled in her mind. For the first time since her arrest, she allowed herself to truly face what she had done. The next morning, Catherine approached the prison counselor. I'd like to join the education program, she said. And I want to know if Dr. Winters needs help with her legal literacy classes. Over the following months, Catherine began to change. She worked with Dr. Winters, helping other inmates understand their legal rights and responsibilities. She joined a prison discussion group focused on ethics and accountability. She started corresponding with her mother regularly. 1 year into her sentence, Catherine received an unexpected visitor. Marcus Chen sat across from her in the visiting room, his FBI badge temporarily surrendered at security. "Agent Chen," Catherine said, surprised. "Coming to gloat?" Marcus shook his head. "I'm here because Judge Harmon asked me to give you something." He slid a sealed envelope across the table. Inside was a brief note in Judge Harmon's precise handwriting. "I've been following your progress through Dr. Winters. True justice isn't just about punishment, it's about restoration. When you're ready to discuss your future, I'll be willing to listen." Catherine looked up, confused. Why would she care about my future? "Judge Harmon doesn't see cases. She sees people," Marcus replied. "Even people who've made terrible choices." As he stood to leave, Marcus paused. "You know, Catherine, you are actually a brilliant lawyer. You just used your talents for the wrong purpose." After we left, Catherine returned to her cell and looked at herself in the small metal mirror above her sink. The designer clothes and perfect makeup were gone. Her hair was pulled back simply, her face bare, but for the first time in years, she could meet her own eyes without looking away. That night, Catherine wrote 2 letters. One to Judge Harmon, accepting her offer to discuss the future. Another to the young associates she had once pressured to break rules, offering a long overdue apology. Catherine Mercer was still serving time for her crimes, but in the confines of her prison cell, she was finally becoming free from the chains of her own making, her greed, her arrogance, and her belief that she was somehow above the law that should have guided her. 4 years and 7 months after Catherine Mercer entered prison, she walked through the release gates of the Federal Correctional Institution. The morning sun felt different on her skin than it had during her daily yard time. Freedom had a weight to it that she hadn't expected. A simple sedan waited in the parking lot. Behind the wheel sat Eleanor Harmon, now retired from the bench, but still commanding respect in her practical blazer and sensible shoes. "Judge Harmon," Catherine said, sliding into the passenger seat. "Thank you for coming." "Eleanor, please," the older woman corrected. "I'm not a judge anymore, and you're not a defendant." As they drove away from the prison, Catherine looked back at the gray buildings that had been her home. During her time there, she had completed a paralegal certification program, taught legal literacy to fellow inmates, and even helped several women prepare successful appeals. "You didn't have to mentor me these past 3 years," Catherine said. "Most people would say I deserved to be forgotten." Eleanor kept her eyes on the road. "Justice isn't about forgetting, Catherine. It's about balance. You paid for your crimes. Now it's time to restore what was damaged." They arrived at a modest apartment building where Catherine would begin her new life. The terms of her release included regular check-ins with a parole officer and restrictions on her employment. She could never practice law again, but there were other ways to use her knowledge. "The community college is expecting you next week," Eleanor said, handing her a folder. "The legal ethics course starts on Monday." Catherine nodded. During her final year in prison, she and Eleanor had developed a program for law students about ethical boundaries and the consequences of crossing them. Catherine would tell her story as a cautionary tale, while Eleanor would provide the judicial perspective. "Do you think they'll listen to a disbarred lawyer?" Catherine asked. "They'll listen precisely because you're disbarred," Eleanor replied. "Nothing teaches like authentic failure and genuine redemption." 6 months later, Catherine stood before a lecture hall filled with first-year law students. Her simple clothes and lack of jewelry were a stark contrast to her former designer wardrobe. "My name is Catherine Mercer," she began. 8 years ago, I was the youngest partner at Barnes & Wilson. I won impossible cases. I made more money than most of you can imagine." She paused, looking around the room. "And I'm a convicted felon who served nearly 5 years in federal prison for corruption, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice." The room was silent. From the back row, Eleanor Harmon nodded encouragingly. "I'm here because I believed I was special," Catherine continued. "I thought rules were for ordinary people. I thought I was smart enough to never get caught." She placed her hands on the podium. I was wrong on all counts. For the next hour, Catherine detailed her fall, not with pride or self-pity, but with clear-eyed honesty about each choice that led her down that path. After the lecture, a student approached her. "Miss Mercer, did you ever regret getting caught? Do you ever miss your old life?" Catherine considered the question. "I regret the harm I caused to the justice system and to innocent people caught in my schemes. But getting caught." She shook her head. "That was the best thing that ever happened to me." Later that evening, Catherine and Eleanor sat in a small restaurant near the courthouse where they had first faced each other as adversaries. 5 law schools had requested our program, Eleanor said, showing Catherine her email. "Your story is making an impact." Catherine smiled softly. "It's not the legal career I planned." "It's better," Eleanor replied. "You're helping build a justice system with more integrity, not undermining it." As they left the restaurant, they passed the courthouse steps where Catherine had once walked in handcuffs, surrounded by reporters. Now people passed without recognizing her. Catherine paused, looking up at the building that represented everything she had once manipulated and now worked to protect. "You know," Eleanor said, following her gaze, "the law itself never failed. It caught up with you, just as it should have." Catherine nodded. "And I'm grateful it did." She turned away from the courthouse toward her future. Some lessons can only be taught by those who learned them the hardest way.